Somewhere in northwestern China, there is a piece of land that mapmakers used to just leave blank, not because nobody had explored it, because there was nothing there worth drawing. No rivers, no roads, no settlements, just sand in every direction for an area roughly the size of Germany. For most of human history, this place had exactly one job: to kill anything that tried to cross it. It has a nickname, and the nickname is not poetic exaggeration. Locals call it the Sea of Death. That is not a metaphor. That is just the math of the place. Less than 2 inches of rain a year. Surface temperatures that can melt the soles of hiking boots. Dunes that shift so aggressively they can bury a road overnight and swallow it whole. For over 1,000 years, travelers on the old Silk Road did not cross this desert. They went around it along the edges, because going through it usually meant not coming out the other side. So here is the question that should stop you for a second. What if I told you that this exact desert, the single most hostile stretch of land in China, is now doing something that deserts are not supposed to do? It is pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, not losing the fight against climate change, actively winning a piece of it. And the reason has nothing to do with a new invention or a breakthrough machine. It comes down to something almost embarrassingly simple: 66 billion trees. If you enjoy videos about massive engineering projects that quietly reshape the planet in ways nobody expected, hit like and subscribe so you never miss one. Now, let's get into the full story, because it starts nearly 50 years before anyone thought to check if it was actually working. Why nobody thought this was possible. To understand why this matters, you first need to understand exactly what this desert is and why engineers for decades considered it basically unfixable. The Taklamakan sits inside a massive geological bowl called the Tarim Basin, and that bowl is the whole problem. Mountains wrap around almost the entire desert. That sounds like it should help, like a natural wall keeping bad weather out. It does the opposite. Those mountains trap moist air before it ever reaches the interior, creating what geographers call a rain shadow. The result is a desert so dry that in some years, the driest patches receive less rainfall than a single afternoon thunderstorm in most parts of the world. And then there is the sand itself. Over 95% of the Taklamakan's surface is covered in shifting dunes, some of them rising taller than a 20-story building, all of them constantly moving. Wind doesn't just blow across this desert, it reshapes it. Roads that engineers build get buried within a season if nobody maintains them. Villages on the desert's edge have spent generations fighting a slow, losing war against sand that creeps a little further into their farmland every single year. For most of the 20th century, the accepted wisdom among engineers and ecologists was straightforward. You do not fix a desert like this. You survive around it. You build your roads on the margins. You plant a few trees near your town if you can spare the water, and you accept that the interior is permanently off-limits to anything that grows. But in 1978, one country decided that acceptance was not good enough. China launched what it called the Three-North Shelterbelt program, a plan so large in scope that when officials first described it publicly, some foreign scientists assumed it was either propaganda or a rounding error in translation. The goal was to plant a continuous belt of trees stretching across the entire northern rim of the country, cutting through 3 regions specifically engineered to stop the expansion of China's deserts before they could swallow more farmland and bury more towns in dust. The scale of the ambition was almost impossible to process. A green wall, built not from stone, but from roots. The wall that took 46 years to close. Here is the part that most people outside China have never heard. This project did not happen quickly, and it was never supposed to. Planting a forest belt around one of the driest places on Earth is not something you can rush, because rushing it means choosing the wrong species in the wrong soil with irrigation systems that fail the moment a drought hits. So the program moved forward in stages, decade after decade, quietly, without much international attention, because tree planting does not generate headlines the way a new skyscraper or a new bridge does. By the end of 2023, workers had connected 2,761 kilometers of greenbelt around the Taklamakan's edges. That left one final stretch, roughly 285 kilometers along the desert's brutal southern rim, widely considered the hardest section of the entire project. This was the section with the strongest winds, the harshest sand hazards, and the least forgiving soil in the entire basin. On November 28, 2024, workers planted the final 100 meters of trees in Union County, on the desert's southern edge, and with that, a 3,046-kilometer ring of vegetation closed completely around the Taklamakan Desert for the first time in recorded history. Let that distance sink in for a second. 3,046 kilometers. That is roughly the driving distance from New York City to Las Vegas, except instead of a highway, it's a living, growing wall of trees, wrapped entirely around a desert the size of Germany. Engineers paired hardy, drought-resistant species, poplars, desert willows, and a tough shrub called saxaul, matched specifically to the harshest microclimates along the route. Every stretch of the belt runs on water-saving drip irrigation because in a place this dry, wasting water is not a minor inefficiency. It's the difference between a forest and a graveyard of dead saplings. One forestry official working on the final stretch put it simply. After 4 decades of trial and error, the teams had finally gotten good at matching the right species to the right patch of sand. That sentence sounds modest. It represents 46 years of failed plantings, dead root systems, and species swapped out and replaced, generation after generation, until the survival rate climbed high enough to make the final push possible. This was never a story about planting trees once and walking away. It was a story about planting, watching them die, learning why, and planting again for nearly half a century straight. Heavy machinery had to level dunes before crews could even get saplings into stable ground, because loose, shifting sand won't hold a root system long enough for a tree to establish itself. In more recent years, engineers even started deploying autonomous planting robots and photovoltaic panels alongside the trees, using solar power to run irrigation pumps in stretches of desert too remote for a stable electrical grid. This wasn't a project stuck in 1978. It kept absorbing new technology decade after decade, right up until the final section closed. Over the full life of the program, more than 66 billion trees have gone into the ground across northern China. 66 billion, not thousand, not million, billion with a B. And China's national forest coverage has climbed from just 10% of the country's total land area back in 1949 to more than 25% today. For a long time, that was the entire story people told about this project, a stubborn, decades-long fight to physically stop sand from moving. What nobody expected was what scientists would find when they finally went back and checked what all those trees were actually doing to the air above them. The discovery nobody was looking for. While construction crews were closing that final 285-kilometer gap, a completely different kind of work was happening in parallel, and it had nothing to do with planting trees. It had to do with measuring what those trees had already done. A team of researchers, including planetary scientist Yuk Young at Caltech, spent years pulling together 25 years of data around the Taklamakan's rim, ground-based observation stations, satellite imagery tracking vegetation cover and photosynthetic activity, and critically, data from NOAA's Carbon Tracker, a model used globally to trace exactly where carbon dioxide is being absorbed and released across the planet. What they were checking for was simple to describe and hard to prove. Was the vegetated edge of this desert now taking in more carbon dioxide than the desert itself was releasing? In other words, had thousands of square kilometers of dead sand quietly turned into something that functions like a lung? The answer, published in January 2026 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the most rigorously peer-reviewed journals on the planet, was yes. Across a full 25-year window, the vegetated rim of the Taklamakan showed a consistent, measurable trend. It was absorbing more carbon dioxide than it released, and the effect was strongest exactly where the greenbelt was planted most densely. Here is the part that made even the researchers pause. This was not supposed to be possible in a landscape this extreme. Deserts, by definition, are considered biological voids, places too dry and too hostile for meaningful plant life, let alone functioning carbon sinks. What this team found was the first quantitative evidence anywhere on Earth that large-scale human planting could take a hyper-arid landscape like this and convert its margins into a net carbon absorber. The wet season, running from July through September, turned out to matter enormously. During those months, rainfall in the region roughly 2.5 times what falls during the dry season, and the vegetation along the rim responded by pulling noticeably more carbon dioxide out of the surrounding air. Scientists tracking atmospheric concentrations even recorded measurable drops during those wet season windows, a signal strong enough to show up in regional air data, not just in ground-level plant samples. And this distinguishes itself from an older, murkier idea in desert science. Some earlier research had suggested that desert sand itself might absorb carbon through a purely chemical, non-biological process, air trapped in warming soil, expanding and interacting with minerals. But that abiotic process turns out to be unreliable and possibly weakening as global temperatures rise. What this new study found was different. It was biological. It was plants, doing what plants do at a scale nobody had previously demonstrated was achievable in a place this hostile. But here is where it gets complicated. Now, if this story ended here, it would already be remarkable. But the honest version of this story has to include what scientists still don't know, because pretending otherwise would be dishonest. And frankly, this story doesn't need exaggeration to be impressive. First, precision matters enormously here. The carbon sink effect is happening around the rim of the Taklamakan, not inside it. The vast interior of the desert, the true heart of the Sea of Death, remains almost entirely unchanged. Researchers were careful to emphasize this distinction. This is not a story about turning an entire desert green. It's a story about what happens at the edges, where trees can actually survive. Second, and this is the part that surprises most people, scientists still don't agree on whether this project has actually achieved its original goal. Remember, the entire Three-North Shelterbelt program wasn't launched to fight climate change. It was launched in 1978 to solve a much older, much more local problem: stop sandstorms from burying roads, farmland, and towns. And on that specific question, the data is genuinely mixed. Some research shows that dunes have been successfully stabilized in the areas directly covered by planted vegetation. But large-scale regional sandstorms, the kind that choke entire cities hundreds of kilometers away, appear to originate from deep inside the desert's interior and are driven by weather patterns that a thin green ring around the edge simply cannot reach. Even Yuk Young, the lead researcher behind the carbon sink study, was careful not to oversell the results. He said plainly that the Great Green Wall's potential to actually slow desertification remains unclear. What he was confident about was narrower and, in some ways, more interesting, that its unexpected role as a carbon sink could become a valuable model for other arid regions around the world, even if it never fully solves the sandstorm problem it was originally built to fix. Third, and this is the trade-off that almost never makes it into headline coverage: water. Planting 66 billion fast-growing, non-native trees into a hyper-arid basin puts enormous sustained pressure on regional groundwater. The entire greenbelt depends on runoff from the surrounding mountains, and that water supply is not infinite. Environmental researchers monitoring the region have flagged a real tension between two goals that are supposed to work together: capturing carbon on one hand and depleting a fragile water table on the other. Whether that trade-off is sustainable over the next 50 years, as the climate around the basin continues to shift, is a question nobody can answer with certainty yet. Scientific debate over the exact numbers has been genuinely public. Other researchers publishing responses in the same journal have pushed back on parts of the methodology, questioning statistical significance and whether older competing explanations for the carbon trend were properly accounted for. The original research team responded point by point, defending their conclusions with additional spatial data. That back and forth is not a weakness in the story. It's what real science actually looks like when the stakes are high enough for people to check each other's work in public, rather than just taking a press release at face value. None of these open questions erase what has already been measured. They simply define the difference between what this project has clearly proven and what it still needs years of continued monitoring to confirm. Why this matters far beyond one desert. Step back for a second and look at the scale of what actually happened here. This is not a pilot program in a research greenhouse. This is not a small demonstration plot that looks impressive in a press photo. This is a real, physical, 3,046-kilometer ring of living trees, wrapped around a desert the size of an entire European country, built over 46 years, and only now being properly measured for what it's actually doing to the planet's carbon cycle. Deserts cover roughly a third of the Earth's land surface. For most of scientific history, that land has been treated as essentially inert when it comes to climate strategy, too hostile to plant, too dry to matter, not worth the investment compared to protecting existing rainforests. What the Taklamakan data suggests, cautiously, with all its open questions intact, is that this assumption might be wrong. Not everywhere. Not without enormous cost, water, and decades of patience. But somewhere, at least at the margins, arid land that was written off as permanently unusable can be engineered, slowly and deliberately, into something that actively pulls carbon out of the air. That is a genuinely new data point in how humans think about fighting climate change. Not a Silicon Valley breakthrough, not a new battery chemistry, just billions of trees planted with patience most modern institutions rarely have over nearly half a century, finally showing measurable results that nobody fully expected when the first saplings went into the ground back in 1978. Whether this becomes a template other countries try to replicate along their own deserts, the Sahara, the deserts of the American Southwest, the arid stretches of Australia, remains an open question. It would require the same scale of commitment, the same decades-long time horizon, and the same willingness to keep monitoring, correcting, and adjusting as new data comes in. That is a much harder thing to replicate than the trees themselves. What is clear is that for the first time in recorded history, a piece of land nicknamed the Sea of Death is no longer just a void on the map. Its edges are alive, they are measurably absorbing carbon, and real scientists are still out there right now, standing at the rim of that green belt, trying to figure out exactly how far this transformation can go. If this video changed how you think about what's possible in the most hostile places on Earth, give it a like and subscribe for more videos about the massive engineering projects quietly reshaping our planet. Turn on notifications so you never miss one. And I want to hear from you in the comments. If the world's most hostile desert can be pushed into becoming a carbon sink, what other landscapes that we've written off as permanently useless do you think are hiding untapped potential right now?